Welcome to LiveDaf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem and welcome back to today's Daf Hayomi Zevachim Yudalid. We begin on Yud Gimel Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. Leimo Katanai, perhaps the question we discussed yesterday and left off with, is really subject to dispute between Tanoim. Okay, the subject of our discussion today again pertains to Tevilas Edzba, regarding the halacha of pigul. So in order to establish pigul in a korban, the kohen doing the avodah will have in mind that he will be serving the mizbeach, serving the korban to the mizbeach, or alternatively he's going to be, the korban will be consumed by its human consumers like the kohanim, etc., beyond the allowable time period. So in a day or two, in a week, chutz lizmanai, outside its time, the korban now becomes pigul, becomes misconstrued. It becomes not only pasul, but if one actually eats the korban, even right now, he's liable to kares. So it's pretty much the most severe form of deficiency possible by a korban. Now that thought, that plan of chutz lizmanai must relate to, must be happening, must be thought about and planned while the kohen is engaged in an act which is deemed primary and critical, essential to the hakrava of the korban. So it primarily relates to the 4 steps, which is shchita, kabbalah, hoilacha, transporting the blood to the mizbeach, and zrika. During any one of those stages, if he's thinking chutz lizmanai, the korban becomes pigul. What about tfilas etzba? So that's a unique act that is done by a certain type of korban, notably the chatas apnimis. So there are 2 types of korban chatas: external, where the dam is placed on the mizbeach on the azara, and we have the internal, the chatas apnimis, whose blood is placed on the internal mizbeach inside the heichal. Now only there does the Torah actually specify. The Torah has to dip his finger in to the blood and then apply it on the mizbeach. So the question is, what status does that act have? Is it considered part of the halacha, part of the transportation stage? In which case, pigul can attach itself to that too. So if he's thinking during that moment, any thought of shaloi be'ezmanai, the korban becomes pigul, or do we say no? It doesn't have the same status as halacha, although it needs to be done, but it's not a prominent function. It's not an element of the akrava which gets its own, identity, so to speak, and is considered part of the halacha. We don't say that. In which case, if he's thinking pigul at that point, no harm was done. That was a question we left off yesterday. And today we're going to suggest that it relates to a machlekes tanoim. Some say it is considered part and partial of the halacha. Some say it's not considered part and parcel of the halacha. In which case, pigul cannot really relate to it. Perhaps it's a machlekes tanoim. We have one brayso which says tfilas etzba mefageles be'echatos, and in fact pigul can attach itself to the act of tfilas etzba by echatos. V'tani idach, and others disagree. The other brayso says lo mefageles. No. If he has a machshava of chutz lizmanai during tfilas etzba, no harm was done. V'lo mispageles, and likewise, if suppose he did the shchita thinking that eventually he's going to do the tfilas etzba tomorrow, chutz lizmanai, again no harm was done because tfilas etzba is not really identified as an avodah. Says the Gemara. So we're assuming the question is whether we identify it as the avodah of halacha or not. My love tanoi, so perhaps it's a machlekes tanoi. So certainly it has to be done. It is part of the avodah, and the kohen has to do it. But the question is it an integral part of the halacha? So it counts as one of those 4 primary phases of the hakrava, which allows for pigul to take effect, so to speak? Or do we say no? It's not considered halach. My love tanoi, perhaps it's a machlekes tanoi. whether it is or it isn't. Says the Gemara, no, you don't have to go that far. You can say that according to both braisos, really, Tevilas Etzba is considered part of the halacha. Harabbanan, the brisa which says pigul does take effect during this act, is going like the Rabbanan, that in fact pigul relates to halacha as well. Rabbi Shimon, the other brisa which says it does not, is going like Rabbi Shimon. If you recall back in the Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon said that in general, pigul cannot transpire during halacha, because halacha, in a sense, is a non-essential aspect of the akrava. Because, he can just shortcut the whole thing. He can just bring the animal right to the mizbeach and bypass the need to do halacha. So according to Reb Shimon, likewise, Tevilas Etzba, which is kind of part of halacha, doesn't really allow for pigul to take effect during that act. Says the Gemara, hold it, Reb Shimon. If in fact this price is going like Reb Shimon, and that's why there's no pigul by Tevilas Etzba, my area Tevilas Etzba. Why limit your discussion to Tevilas Etzba? There, pigul doesn't take effect. Ha'amar, Reb Shimon himself tells us elsewhere that there's no pigul at all, unless the carbon is an external carbon. You see, Shlamim is the father of all piguls. That's where we learn pigul from. Says Reb Shimon, unless the carbon is similar to a shlamim, i.e., it's an external carbon, which is processed outside in the azara, so only that can have pigul. But our carbon, chatas, ha-pnimis, which requires the Tevilas Etzba, is internal. There's no pigul at all. Forget about when exactly, precisely when it happened, whether it was during the halacha of the chatas or the Tevilas Etzba. There is never pigul by chatas ha-pnimi. You're right, says the Gemara, apparently this is not Reb Shimon. Eloha v'ha-rabbanon. In fact, both brises are the rabbanon, that there is pigul by all karbanis. Ask you a question regarding Tevilas Etzba. The answer is like this. When one brisa says, yes, pigul by Tevilas Etzba, the other one says no, two different carbon chatas. Kan, the one that says no, pigul by Tevilas Etzba, b'chatois hachitzoin, external chatas, where it doesn't say, the pasuk does not spell out, dip your finger in. So although technically he has to do it by default, how else is he going to get the blood from his finger to the, right? But it's not stipulated in the pasuk, in which case it's not labeled as a distinct part of the avodah which allows for pigul to take effect. Whereas the other brisa which says it does count for halacha and does allow for pigul to take effect, internal chatas, where it says v'taval, that the kohen should actually dip his finger in, that gives it a special status, considered like part of the halacha, and can activate pigul. Asks the Gemara, chatois hachatzoina is pshita. Why even discuss the external chatas? Of course, there's no pigul by Tevilas Etzba. Haloi ksiv behu v'taval. If you look at the Torah, there's no mention of dipping fingers. So of course, it's not counted as part of the avodah. Why even discuss it? No, there is some importance to Tevilah, because technically he has to do it. Istrich. There's a point in mentioning and discussing this. Why? Perhaps I would say, Torah does tell the kohen to take the blood manually, i.e. your finger. It doesn't spell it out, but it's implied. In fact, he has to do it manually. Imagine a monkey comes along, Rami luhu ayade, puts the blood on his finger, puts it on his hand without him himself doing it. Does it work? No. Because he didn't fulfill the directive of the Torah. The Torah says, take it, you take it. He'll have to retake it again. So I would think that by implication, it's as though the Torah specified dip your finger. It's as though the Torah tells him to dip his finger. Kamash on the point of the Brisa is to say no. although he has to do it, but it wasn't spelled out in the Torah. That's why the Torah does not, specifically doesn't say, V'tav, I'll dip your finger, the mashmachi, to tell you. On the one hand, it's not really a prominent aspect of avodah, which would allow for pigul. Meaning, if he has a machshava of pigul during that moment, no, that moment isn't considered a critical part of the avodah. It's not avodah chashuva, Rashi says, because it wasn't spelled out in the Torah. In contrast to shchita, kabbalah, haylah, chazrika, those are spelled out. Those allow for pigul, but not during tvilas etzba. Mashmach, on the other hand, the Torah is implying that he has to do it. He can't do it, by remote control. It has to be done manually. But it's not on the same level as the other phases of the akrava, and therefore, if he has a machshava of pigul during that moment, it doesn't really count. So the bottom line is, it seems that in fact it is the consensus that by echatas apnimis, where not only is dipping required, it's actually spelled out in the pasuk. So the act of tvilas etzba is considered an avodah chashuva, a prominent component of the avodah. It's like hoylacha. So if he has a machshavas pigul at that moment, it's pigul. Now, according to Reb Shimon, in any case, pigul wouldn't apply by chatas apnimis because it's not similar to the shlamim, which is external. Furthermore, Reb Shimon holds that in any case, during haylacha, there is no pigul option, as Reb Shimon explains in the Mishnah, because technically you can do it without haylacha. You can't do it without shchita, kabbalah, uzrika, but you could shortcut the haylacha by just doing it right near the mizbech with no need to transport. Reb Shimon machshav b'hiluch, so he says if there's machshav of pigul during hiluch, it's kosher. Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish. Here's an exception to that rule. This only applies to external karbanos, so the ones in the Azara, which allow for this shortcut. You can technically do the shchita right near the mizbeach and avoid the halacha. But Moeder Rabbi Shimon would agree by halachas while he's transporting the chatois hapnimi, the internal chatois, where Rashi says it's not possible. It's not feasible to do the shchita, inside in the heichal where the mizbeach is. It's not derech eretz to do so. So it's not really deemed doable. So inevitably he's going to have to do the shchita outside in the azor, and he's going to have to transport the blood into the heichal. So in this case, it is an essential component of the akrava, and therefore shemachshava poiselasbu. If he has a machshava during that moment, it makes it possible. Hoyel va'avoda she'en yochel levato. Since this is an avodah which cannot be discounted. Asks the Gemara, hold about a minute ago we said that internal karbanos never get pigul according to Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon just told us, unless the carbon is similar to a shlamim in a sense that it's done outside, there's no pigul status to it. You're right. Even though he had a machshava of chutz l'zmani, pigul in a technical sense will not be applied, but it's still a deviation and a serious one, and the carbon becomes pasul. Moidahu, or haya, live sol mekavachayim. Even if Shimon would agree that in a case of an attempt to make it pigul, it becomes at least pasul, based on logic. Why? Uma shaloi lishman. Since the machshava of shaloi lishman, so he has a shlamim and he is shechting it, thinking that it's an oilam. No harm was done. The shlamim is still kosher. So despite the fact that the thought of shaloi lishma is in a way less severe, because it doesn't really disqualify the shlamim, still we find that regarding echatas, right, shaloi lishma totally disqualifies it. Pasal b'chatas. So despite its leniency on one hand, it's very strict on the other hand. Certainly chutz l'zmani, a thought of chutz l'zmani, which is right a pigul thought, which certainly affects a shlamim, so it has that advantage. Of course, it would affect a chatas and make it possible. In adin, shivso b'chatois. So we learn from here that a machshava chus leizmanai, even though at times perhaps it can't make something pigel, but at least it'll make it possible. Okay, says the Gemara. We've established that chutz l'zmani makes possible. Chutz l'mkaimai minolam. What if you had a machshava chutz l'mkaimai? Outside of its place, outside of the Beis HaMikdash, I will process it there. So he's doing the shechita with the intention of doing the zrika outside the Beis HaMikdash. And Rashi explains, right, we have 3 levels. Shlot l'shmai, he has a mind to different carbon. Chutz l'zmani, he had a mind to serve it beyond its allowable time, that's pigel. And we have chutz l'mkaimai, which is somewhere in between. Doesn't make it pigel. If you eat it, it's no kares, but it makes it puzzle. And Rashi explains, chutz l'mkaimai is also learned from his shlamim, just like chutz l'zmani is. Shlamim is a source for both, for chutz l'zmani and chutz l'mkaimai. According to Shimon, it only applies to a carbon which is comparable to a shlamim, an external carbon. An internal carbon will not become pigel. But as we said, although it won't become pigel, it will become puzzle. If he has a machshava chutz l'zmani, what if you have a machshava chutz l'mkaimai on an internal carbon? V'ashkan chutz l'zmani, you've established that chutz l'zmani can invalidate an internal carbon. Chutz l'mkaimai, what if he has a machshava chutz l'mkaimai? No, how do we know that too? Will impact the internal chatas. Can you learn it from chutz l'zmani? No. Chutz l'zmani is much more severe. It generates kares if one eats the carbon, which chutz l'mkaimai doesn't have. Can you learn it from chutz l'zmani? No, mal chutz l'zmani can't compare to chutz l'zmani. Shekain kares. There's a kares element there which chutz l'mkaimai doesn't have. We're going to learn from shlei l'shma, which invalidates the chatas. Shlei l'shma is an advantage over chutz l'mkaimai regarding something called a bama, an altar. So at times during our history, they were allowed to offer karbanis on a bama, on a mizbeach, out in the open. So there's no concept of territory, of place, of makayim, of outside the makayim, right? Rashi says, Kala bika mikayim atzay fa'olam. The makayim just stretches on endlessly. There's no defined makayim. So chutz l'mkaimai would not apply. Would not be a detrimental factor regarding a carbon brought on a bama. But shalei l'shma would. Mislabeling the carbon, that problem applies anywhere, whether it's in the mizbeach, in the Beis HaMikdash, or in a bama. So in a way, you see that shalei l'shma has an advantage, has a greater strictness over shalei b'mkaimai, which doesn't apply by a bama. So how could he learn one from the other? You can't learn from shalei l'shma to shalei b'mkaimai, because shalei l'shma has an advantage that applies to a bama as well, as opposed to shalei b'mkaimai, which doesn't pertain to a bama. Asks the Gemara, hold it. Which carbon gets affected by shalei l'shma? Which carbon gets pas? Shalei l'shma b'mai noyig. What does it apply to? B'pesach v'chatas. Only those two. The only two carbonas that become pas by shalei l'shma. So if we're seeking to compare chutz l'mkaimai shalei l'shma, which is limited to pesach v'chatas, you can't say, shalei l'shma is more strict than shalei b'mkaimai, because shalei b'mkaimai doesn't apply to a bama. We're talking about a case where pesach and chatas get affected by shalei l'shma. So too, shalei b'mkaimai should also disqualify a carbon. Now guess what? Pesach and chatas can never be offered on a bama. That's the halacha. Not all carbonas can be brought on a bama. Pesach and chatas b'bama like carbon, they can never be offered on a bama. So if we speak about Pesach and chatas being affected by shalei l'shma, we're speaking about a conventional setting. So in a conventional setting, you could compare shalei b'mkaimai to shalei l'shma. Because in a conventional setting, there's no advantage to shalei l'shma over shalei b'mkaimai. They both apply fully. Hence, you can say, just like shalei l'shma will make a chatas apnimis puzzle, likewise, machshava chutz l'mkaimai on a chatas apnimis will be possible. Everybody's saying, what? Another alternative, another way to prove that shalei b'mkaimai will also affect the chatas apnimis, because there's a connection in the pasuk connecting chus l'mkaimai to chus l'zmanai. And just like we've established that by chus l'zmanai, even on chatas apnimis, it becomes possible, although not pigul, it becomes possible. The same with chus l'mkaimai. Everybody's saying hekeshu, it's a hekesh in the pasuk, keshu. In the same pasuk, where we discuss the standard pigul of chus l'zmanai, likewise, chus l'mkaimai is mentioned to connect them, to give them the same status. The word shlishi, on the third day, right, beyond the allowable time, it's referring to chus l'zmanai, the standard pigul, and the word pigul in the pasuk, even though it uses the word pigul, but it's not talking about the standard pigul. Chus l'mkaimai is referring to a fellow who thought, who planned, who plotted, schemed to bring the carbon outside the Beis Hamikdash. So the two deficiencies are linked together, and just as the chus l'zmanai will disqualify a chatas apnimis, likewise chus l'mkaimai. So the bottom line is like this: according to Reb Shimon, since shlamim is the father source for pigul, the only way pigul can be applied to a carbon is that carbon is comparable to a shlamim, i.e., it relates to the mizbeach hachitzon, but not a chatas hapnimis. Nevertheless, the Gemara established that even by chatas hapnimis, should he have thoughts of chus l'zmanai, even chus l'mkaimai, although there won't be pigul, but the carbon becomes pus. Amar, back to Reb Shimon, who says that halacha is an interesting thing, because sometimes you can discount the halacha, you can avoid halacha by processing the carbon right near the mizbeach. And therefore he says, since halacha in that case is deemed non-essential, it wouldn't be susceptible to thoughts of pigul. However, as we just learned, that's good by the external carbonates, where we have a mizbeach within reach. But the chatas apnimis, whose dam is brought inside the heichal, inevitably there's a stretch of road that he has to travel from the azara all the way to the heichal. And on that segment of required travel, it's considered essential, and therefore it's susceptible to thoughts of pigul. However, we can try to break it down and minimize and shrink that required trip to the point that we have very little space, very little walking space, which in fact is susceptible to thoughts of pigul. Okay, so before we begin, let's just sort of map out now minds. So we have the Beis Hamikdash from the west. Let's start from the west, from the Kodesh HaKadoshim, all the way inside, over to the east. So we have the Heichal, inside which we have the internal Mizbeach, we have the Menorah as well, we have the Shulchan with the breads, upon which they had the Bazichan, the scoops of fragrance, which it would take out once a week and bring it out to the external Mizbeach and the Azara. Okay, so that's going on in the Heichal. Then we have the Ulam, which is the entry area to the Heichal. Now, within the Ulam, we have basically two sections. We have the entry area, and we have the doorway, the actual doorway between the Ulam and down the Azara, which is sort of beneath it, below it. So you have the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Heichal, the Ulam, and the entryway to the Ulam. So let's call the Ulam section 1, and the entryway itself, the doorway itself, section 2. Beneath that we have the Azara, which houses the Mizbeach. Now, the section between the Mizbeach and the entry to the Ulam is called Bein Ulam la Mizbeach. Now, typically, a carbon, some of them which require to be processed in the north, tzafin, of the Azara. So it would be on the north side of the Mizbeach, the Mizbeach and the north wall of the Azara. According to some, you can actually take a carbon and process it and do the shchita between the Mizbeach and the Ulam. Right? In that little section between Mizbeach and the Ulam. Now, if in fact he would bring the korban right there and shecht it, right near the door of the ulam. So even if it's a chatas apnimis, whose blood has to be transported inside the heichal, how far does he really have to go? If you break it down to the bare minimum, how far does he really have to go? If he really wants, he can shorten his trip very, very drastically. He can bring the chatas right near the doorway of the ulam, shecht it there, and he transports it through section 2, which is the doorway, section 1, which is the ulam, right into the doorway of the heichal. And technically, he could bring the mizbech to the doorway of the heichal. So although they would position it all the way inside, but technically he could be standing right by the doorway. And that's where he places the blood. So all he needed to travel through is the entryway to the ulam and the ulam itself. So on that little section, that part of halacha is deemed essential, but only that. So even if he chooses to take the animal far into the azara, do shchita all the way down there, and transport the blood all the way into the heichal, all the way deep inside the heichal, you can't deem that essential. Technically, he can just bypass, he can avoid that. He can shrink his trip to the bare minimum. But a bare minimum there is, through the entry of the ulam, and the ulam itself till it gets to the heichal. That's one scenario. Now regarding the lechem apanim, we mentioned there are bezichim, these spoons, on the shulchan. Once a week they take them out and burn it on the mizbeach in the azara. According to some shittas, preferably you burn it on the mizbeach, but should they choose, they can actually burn it on the floor of the azara, right? As you leave the ulam and the door of the ulam, you reach the azara right there. You can burn it. And really, they can put the shulchan right near the entryway, leaving the heichal. So how far does he have to travel? Technically, theoretically, a very short trip. Just from the heichal through the ulam, section 1, to section 2, which is the doorway of the ulam, that's it. And he burns it right on the spot. So only that little section is deemed essential. And only that is considered true halacha, which according to Reb Shimon would be susceptible to legal thoughts. Furthermore, according to some shittas, the entryway, the ulam, has the same kedusha as the heichal itself. If that's the case, so the starting point could be right near the doorway of the ulam. He can have his breads sitting right in the ulam itself, right near section 2. And all he needs to do is transport them through the doorway to the floor of the azara. So only that little section qualifies for pickle. Furthermore, according to some, the doorway itself of the ulam has the same status as inside. So technically, the bezichim could have been positioned in that doorway right near the exit of the ulam. So there's really very little room to maneuver. Very little walking needs to be done. All you need to do is extend it, stick it out to the azara, and you can burn it right there. So there really is not much halacha to be done. And there isn't much opportunity for pigul. Interesting. Okay, let's see. Amar Rava. So this is back to Reb Shimon, who says only the part of halacha which is deemed essential, which you can't do without, only that qualifies. And only that is susceptible to pigul thoughts. Intim Telaima, if you're going to suggest that Reb Shimon, who's the author of this opinion, Savar L'Kibrei, would adopt his own son's opinion, the Amar who says, Beinu ulam v'lemizbeach tzafin, that the section between the ulam and the mizbeach of the azara is considered like the north, which means to say it qualifies for shchita of a chatas hapnimis. You can bring it right up there. So technically, he could bring he could have brought the chatas very close, right to the entry of the ulam, and all that's required is to transport it through the entry of the ulam, section 2, and in the ulam itself, section 1. That's it. Once he hits the heichal, technically, the mizbeach can be standing there waiting for him. So in this case, ein machshava me'elas, b'lochas chatois hapnimiyos. So a machshava pigul can only impact when he's transporting the dam of the internal chatas. When elo mipesach ulam ulufnim, only from the time he enters the ulam, the entryway of the ulam, through the ulam, until he gets to the heichal. That's one point. Next point. Now we're going to switch tracks, switch directions, and relate to removal of the bazichim from the shulchan in the heichal that will be taken out to be burnt in the Azor. If Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Yehuda, the Amr who says, technically you don't need to burn it on the Mizbeach outside. You can burn it right on the floor of the Azor as you exit the Ulam. The whole floor space of the Azor is Mekadesh and is allowed to be used as a Mizbeach. In this case, you have theoretically a very short trip from the Heichal to the Azor. So the machshava of pigul could only affect while he's transporting. Siluk bazichen, after having removed those spoons to be taken outside, elam pesach hechav lachutz. Strictly, only once he exits the heichal till he gets to the azara. So section 1 and section 2. But prior to that point, the hiluch is not necessary. Past that point, again, it's unnecessary. Furthermore, number 3, if in fact Rav Shimon will hold that the entryway, the ulam itself, section 1, has the same kedusha as the heichal, chadahi, and technically he can lay the spoons in the ulam as well. So the starting point is the ulam. All he needs to traverse is the entryway to the ulam as he exits to the azara. So machshava can only affect during that segment. Ein machshava me'elas el mi pesach ulam v'lachutz. Only as he's walking through the pesach of the ulam till he gets to the azara. Number 4, according to some, the entryway itself, the door space itself of the ulam, has a status like inside the ulam. Technically, he could have a spoon sitting right there, because the entry is like the ulam is like the heichal, so it's like one big extension of the heichal. There's very little room to walk. So there's no walking at all, even one step will not be susceptible to machshava of pigul, because technically he doesn't have to walk at all. Just pick up the spoon and push it out to the floor of the azara. Only as he's extending his hand. Only that little bit is deemed essential. That little section. Furthermore, if you're going to tell me that Rav Shimon holds halacha shlei v'regla shmo halacha, that halacha needs to be done by foot, just extensions, passings, are not really halacha. If that's the case, so in this last scenario, there's no option for machshava pigul, because there's no walking element at all. You can bypass any walking. So bottom line is, according to Rav Shimon, even though we've established that pigul can affect halacha if it's deemed necessary, for instance by the chatos apnimius, because he has to take it inside, but how far does he have to walk? Very little, perhaps. And regarding siluk bazichen as well, very little, perhaps nothing at all. Furthermore, on this topic of halacha, so Abaye asked the announcer of Chisda, the Amoraim, used to have people standing next to him like loudspeakers. They didn't have amplifiers. So had people with loud voices, and they would speak, announce their words, their lessons, their shiurim. So Abaye asked Rav Chisda's helper, please ask Rav Chisda a question on my behalf. Halacha b'zar mahu. Halacha, as we said, is in a way different than the others and the other elements of the avodah, because for many reasons, one of which is that halacha is not really accomplishing much except for sort of transporting. It's a transporting act. The question is, can a zar do that? We know a zar can do shchita, but he cannot do kabbalah, he can't do... What about halacha? Halacha b'zar ma'u. Can a non-kohen do halacha? Amar like Sherry says, yeah, it's fine. Right? So Rav Chisda responded, of course it's okay. And I can prove it from a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim. The Mikra Misayin is a pasuk that supports me. Vayishchatu es ha-Pesach. So the Yisraelim, the owners, shechted their carbon Pesach. Vayizruku ha-kayhanim es hadam miyadam. Right? The kayhanim took the blood from their hands. We're assuming the Yisraelim, the owners, and did the zrika on their behalf. V'alvim afshit and alvim were flaying the carbon. So you see that the Israelim were transporting the blood to the Kehanim, near the Mizbeach. So you see, halacha is kosher with a zar. Masav Rav Sheshes, I have a question. I have a braysa. That a zar is possible by halacha. Zar, oin v'oinen, or a person who had a death in the family. Shikar, a person who's shikar, drunk. Ubalmum, blemished kohen. They're unsuitable for anything. But Kabbalah, likewise, b'halacha, there you go. A zar cannot do halacha. Ubizrika, possible. V'chein yosh, v'chein smoil, or a kohen who's sitting. You got to stand while you serve. Or doing it with his left hand, to Yufta, that's a refutation on Rav Chisda. Clearly, a non-kohen cannot be involved in halacha. Asks the Gemara, but he had a pasuk to support him. For Rav Chisda Kra-Kam had a pasuk, David Masa Itztaba. Who says that the Israelim were actually transporting? Itztaba is like a post. They were standing, holding the blood. So the Kehanim collected the blood, and the owner just stood holding it. And the Kohen, when he got a chance, came back and took it from him. So Israel never did an actual act of halach. But, says the Gemara, Rav Yosef, they both say, Damar Tavayu, halacha b'zar, this question whether a zar can do halacha is really a machlokes. Same old discussion between Rab Shimon and the Rabbanon. Machlokes Rab Shimon and Rabbanon. How? Rab Shimon the Amar, avoida she'efshel levatla. Shimon is the one who says regarding pigel, that any element of the avoida that could be discounted, that could be deleted, that we can do without, such as halacha, is not really status as avoida, lav avoidahi. Likewise, ksher bazar, just like it's not susceptible to thoughts of pigel, it's not considered an integral part of the process. Likewise, the zar can do it, as opposed to the rabbanon, who don't reckon with that factor. Fact is, it's part of the avoida, the rabbanon, just like you can do pigel by halacha, psula, if it's done by a zar. Amalei abayi. You're linking one to the other. If it's not essential, then a zar can do it. But if it's essential, then a zar cannot. I'll disprove this formula by pointing you to shchita. Is shchita necessary? Of course, you bet. You can't discount shchita. And even a non-kohen can do it. All agree Yisrael can do shchita. Apparently, the two things aren't linked. Two factors aren't connected. Being essential doesn't really play a role regarding Kohen versus Yisrael. Normally, he says, no, you can't prove anything from Shchita. Shchita lav avoida. Shchita is not really avoida. Tosfos brings, look, even a regular animal, before you eat it, you have to shecht it. Apparently, the mitzvah of Shchita is not really related to avoida. Something you have to do to any animal. Lav avoida here. So it's unrelated to our discussion. But something that's really considered avoida, and it's essential, then only a kohen can do it. V'loi, says the more, really? You tell me shchita is not avoida? V'amar Abzeira, Amar Rab, he tells us regarding a paraduma, only a kohen can do shchita on the paraduma. Apparently, it is identified as avoida. Shchita is para, the paraduma. Who does the shchita? Only a kohen. If it's done bizarre, it's psula. Rabbi explained, it's based on a pasuk, Elazar b'chukah ksiba. The pasuk by Paraduma says Elazar has to do it. Elazar ben Aaron. Chukah means it's absolute, non-negotiable. Well, it says about Shani Para. You can't prove anything from the Para. Doesn't mean that it's avoida. If anything, certainly a Para is not related to avoida. The Kachah Bedek HaBayisi. In fact, it's not really a carbon meant for the Mizbeach. It's an asset belonging to the Beis Hamikdash. Kosher Bedek HaBayisi. It's monetarily Kaddish. In fact, it's not even offered on the Mizbeach. It's taken on the Harazeisim, right? So, the Kohen requirement by the Shechita of the Parah is unrelated to our discussion. Rashi says, it's Xeris HaKosov. It has to be processed fully by a Kohen. But back to our discussion regarding karbanis, regular karbanis. Certainly this formula can hold true. So typically, something which is avoida and it cannot be discounted, cannot be done without, then only a kohen can do. But shchita is not really, it's an exception because it's not an avoida. Says the Gemara, what do you mean? Vlav kol decheinhu? If anything, what you're saying will prove just the opposite. Kosher b'dek habayis have avoida. If the shechita by kosher b'dek habayis, like the parah, is required to be done by a kohen because it's considered like an avoida, kosher mizbeach lav avoida. How could you say the same act by a regular korban? Kosher mizbeach is not an avoida. If anything, standards are higher by kosher mizbeach. Amar Rav Shisha ben Rav didn't know. Paraduma runs on a different system. The kohen requirement is no indication of whether or not it's avoida. There are some things that have to be done by a kohen, just like examining a nega. We just had this week's parsha, right? Who's in charge of a nega? A kohen. Does that mean it's avoida in the Beis Hamikdash? Of course not. And still, Ubay Yikunim requires a kohen. He determines tar, he determines tamei. By the way, Chavetz Chaim writes, we're all accustomed to observing from the parsha of the nega of the Mitzvah how impactful in a negative way words can be, right? Said the Chavetz Chaim, look at the bright side. Look how positively impactful words can be. Look at the kohen. He says merely one word, tar. That's it. That determines his status. To the good. He goes home. He's free. He's tar. He's pure. One word. So we see the power of a good word. A word of encouragement. A compliment. A chizuk. It can change a person's whole attitude, the whole perspective, his whole day, his whole perception of himself. It can have a ripple effect on his friends, on his family, his wife, and his kids for generations to come. Power of one good word. In any case, Maris Negoim requires a kohen, even though it's not an avoida. Likewise, the shechita of the paraduma requires a kohen, despite it not being avoida. Ask the Gemara. Okay, so you're telling me that the two things are linked? If the avoida is essential, you need a kohen. Otherwise, you don't. We have something called halachas evarim. They would transport the limbs of a korban up to the ramp of the mizbeach for eventual burning on the mizbeach. Now, that specific function is something that could be avoided. I mean, you don't have to start off at a distance and bring it closer. The avodah she'ef shel avatli, it could be undone and bypassed. Upsula b'zar, and still we see in the Torah that only a kohen can do that. The pasuk says, "V'hikra kohen sakol viktam mizbeach." We learned that this pasuk is going on transporting the evarim. So halachas evarim lekevesh. So I think, well, you're right. This is another exception. The gully where the Torah reveals indicates that we need a kohen. Gully, okay. So we know that. But what the Torah did not explicitly state, we assume that it's not so. Right? For instance, halachas adam, where the Torah doesn't specify you need a kohen, we assume since it's not essential, it can pass with a Yisrael as well. Ask the Gemara, what do you mean? We have simple logic to undo that. It's kal v'chaymer. If you're even transporting the evarim to the kevesh, which isn't critical to kapara, you can do without it. The korban is kosher even without it. But Yikuna requires a kohen. Certainly halachas dam, transporting of the blood to the mizbeach, which is critical to the process, to the general process, the makva kapara, which would uphold the kapara. If the blood doesn't get to the mizbeach. Wouldn't you agree that a kohen is needed? It's Marnami. Likewise, Amar Ula, Amar Ulaza, halacha b'zar is in fact psula. Filu Rab Shimon or Rab Shimon, who says halacha isn't really essential and therefore is not susceptible to pigel, but it's still part and parcel of the hakrova and requires a Yisrael. And the Farshim explained what's the difference. Because on the one hand, it is avodah. And avodah needs to be done by a kohen. On the other hand, pigel has very specific rules. The machshava of pigel has to transpire while he's preparing the korban for consumption. Right? But if this act that he's doing now is not deemed critical to the preparation of the korban, so it can't really activate pigel. Right? Only something which is needed, which is vital to preparing the korban for consumption, that allows for pigel. But halacha, as important as it is, since theoretically it can be done without halacha, you can do without it. So it's not deemed vital to the preparation aspect of the korban, and therefore it doesn't allow for pigel. Ibayli comes a new question, which we a little bit touched on before. Halacha. How would one translate halacha? Walking, right? What if he transports the blood without walking, just by passing? He has an assembly line, he passes from one to the next. Shema halacha, is it considered halacha? Has he fulfilled halacha? Perhaps it's not halacha. Tashma, v'chein yeshiv, v'chein small pasuk, we learned before, regarding everything according halacha. He's doing it sitting, or with his left hand, it's pasuk. We assume you can't do much, walking with your feet while you're sitting. So the problem seems to be only because he was sitting. But let's say he would be doing a similar function while standing, i.e. passing, it would be okay. So you see, you don't have to walk. But if he's standing, doing the yeshiv in a way which is similar to the function of sitting, meaning just passing, so instead of sitting, he passed it standing, it would be kosher. So you see, that also passes. It says, perhaps he's actually shuffling along. So when we speak about sitting, not working, that's although he was shy of Mesha, he was shuffling along. Problem is because he was sitting. But if he were to be oimid, standing, and doing the same type of thing, dumi du yeshiv, in a way which is similar to the function that he was doing when he was sitting, meaning that I put walking a little bit, that's okay. That's okay. But perhaps, if he's not involved in walking at all, then that's not considered hoylach. Tashma, here comes another raya. This is regarding the Pesach. Right? There was an enormous amount of carbonates there in the Azara, and the Yisrael would come and shecht. The Kahana was standing like on a conveyor belt, passing the spoons over to the Mizbeach from one to the next. Shachad Yisrael, the Yisrael would do the shechita. In fact, it was a mitzvah for the owner to do it, if he could do it, right? The person meant to do his own mitzvah, rather than let somebody else do it for him. Shachad Yisrael, the Kohen did the Kabbalah, and then they would just pass it on, and it would just zoom. You would barely see it. I once read a whole description of how this happened. It was like miraculous. The blood would just go, shh, the spoons would be back and back, and then it was like, you'd pass it and take the empty one past. It was like a high-speed conveyor belt. Passes it on to his Kohen friend, and so on and so on, until it gets to the Mizbeach, and they do this rika, and they pass back the empty one. Apparently passing is considered halach. Hasan Nami denied the purta there too. Let's assume that they did move a little bit with their feet towards the Mizbeach. So what's the point of discussing this? I'll tell you how great it was, how glorious it was, having so many Kohanim standing there. That enhanced the whole experience. Tashma, another raya to this question regarding non-walking halacha. Kibul akosha v'nasan l'pasal. Suppose a proper kohen collected the blood and he passed it on to an unqualified person. So there are two ways to solve this. Either he goes to the other side, takes it from him, and brings it to the Mizbeach, or yachsel l'kosha. The Brisa says he has to return it, give it back to him, go back, backtrack, take it back, and then start again. Why do you have to do that? Just go over to the other side, or you pass it to this fellow who's now holding it. Go to the other side, take it from him, and continue on. If in fact passing is considered halacha, so at this point you're okay. Why do you have to redo that? Yachsel l'kosha. Emo, you're right. Let's learn. The Brisa says yachsel l'kosha means yachsel hakosha v'yikabla. There's no need to backtrack. Yachsel hakosha v'yikabla. The kosha has to go and go around and take it from this fellow and bring it to the Mizbeach. Because perhaps halacha shalei b'regel is okay. So you need not redo that passing, the act that he did. Itmar, in fact, we learned Amulam Rabbi Yechanan, halacha shalei b'regel lo yishma halacha. So he concludes that it's not considered halacha unless you did it by foot, as per the literal meaning of the word halacha. Okay, so today's daf focused on halacha in all different ways. We discussed Tvilas etzba of achatas apnimis. Is that considered part of the halacha? We assume it is. It seems to be the consensus, in which case, just like machshavas pigul can attach itself to halacha, likewise to the Tvilas etzba, but not to the achatas apnimis, even though technically he would have to dip his finger, but it wasn't explicitly described in the pasuk, so it doesn't have the status of halacha. Now, according to Reb Shimon, unless it's an external carbon, there's no pigul at all, but however, internal carbonates are susceptible to a certain extent that there's a machshava of shlil lishma, chos lazmani, some kaimim by chatas hapnimis, at least it becomes pasul. Once again, according to Reb Shimon, there's no machshavas pigel unless the on halacha, because halacha is something that could be discounted and avoided. Not so by the chatzas pnimis where it's necessary. However, as we sort of chopped and cut, there is a very small, minute segment that can be considered the essential halacha, which would be susceptible to pigel. So only that little piece, but no more than that. We concluded that regarding a zar doing halacha, it would seem to be machlekes Shimon Rabbanan, right? But at the end of the day, the Gemara concludes that no, a zar cannot do halacha even according to Shimon. It's considered avodas hakar, which doesn't allow for anybody other than a kohen to do. And then we concluded that halacha needs to be beregel. All the best to you, and atzlacha.